The lights dim. A single spotlight finds a chair, empty, waiting. Somewhere beyond the cameras, a crowd holds its breath without knowing why. This is the story of a night nobody who was there will ever forget. The night a man used to being protected walked into a room built entirely on the absence of protection and discovered, in real time, in front of millions, that the version of himself he'd spent years constructing could not survive contact with a stranger who simply refused to play along. It started as television. It ended as something closer to a mirror. What you're about to hear isn't about any one person. It's about what happens when the story we tell about ourselves collides with a room that owes us nothing. The studio smelled like fresh paint and hot stage lights, the particular mix of ozone and nerves that exists nowhere else on Earth. Rows of seats curved around the set in a horseshoe, filling slowly with people who'd waited months for these tickets, who dressed up for a Tuesday night taping like it was an occasion, because for most of them, it was. Above the stage, monitors flickered through pre-show graphics. Below, a floor director paced with a headset clamped to one ear, counting down in a low murmur only the crew could hear. Cables snaked across the floor like something alive, taped down in haphazard excess. The air held that specific tension unique to live television, the sense that anything could happen, and probably would. Backstage, in a green room 2 doors down from the studio floor, a man we'll call the Duke sat in a leather chair, watching his own reflection in a mirror ringed with bulbs. He straightened his jacket, adjusted his cufflinks, practiced, almost imperceptibly, the smile he'd use in 11 minutes. Warm, a little rueful, the smile of a man who has suffered and grown and wants you to know both. He'd done interviews before, dozens of them. He knew the rhythm: question, answer, redirect, land the message. He'd been coached by publicists who understood optics the way generals understand terrain. Tonight was supposed to be simple. Talk about the charity. Talk about healing. Let the audience see the man behind the headlines. He had no idea he was about to meet the one interviewer in America who didn't care what the pre-interview notes said. Down the hall, in a different room entirely, the host, we'll call him Frank, sharp-suited, sharper-tongued, a man who'd built an entire career on refusing to flinch, flipped through his cue cards one last time, then set them down. He didn't need them. He never really did. Frank's whole approach to interviewing was built on a simple, almost violent honesty. Ask the question everyone's thinking and let the chips fall. You ready for this one? His producer asked, leaning in the doorway. Frank didn't look up. Guy wants to talk about freedom while surrounded by security detail bigger than the president's. I got questions. The producer laughed, nervous. Just don't torch the ratings, okay? Frank smiled, the smile of a man who'd been asked that 1,000 times and ignored it every single one. No promises. Neither man, in that moment, understood what the next 30 minutes would become. Neither man could have. The stage manager's voice crackled through the headsets. 2 minutes. Somewhere in the audience, a young woman turned to her friend and whispered, "This is going to be good." She had no idea how right she was, or how uncomfortable good was about to feel. Live television has a texture you can't replicate anywhere else. It's the sound of an audience breathing in unison. It's the particular hush that falls right before the red light blinks on. It's the knowledge, shared silently by everyone in the room, that whatever happens next cannot be taken back, cannot be edited, cannot be softened by a second take. The theme music swelled. The applause sign lit up, though it barely needed to. The crowd was already on its feet, already clapping, already leaning forward in anticipation of the exact kind of unscripted collision this show had built its reputation on. Frank walked out first, waving, soaking in the energy with the ease of a man who'd done this 10,000 times. He settled into his chair, that familiar half-smirk already in place, and let the applause wash over him a moment longer than necessary. He liked the silence right before he spoke. It gave him room. "Big show tonight," he said, addressing the camera directly. "We've got royalty. Actual royalty. Please welcome our guest." The Duke walked out to a fresh wave of applause, waving with practiced warmth, that rehearsed smile finding its mark. He shook Frank's hand, sat down, adjusted his jacket the way he had 100 times backstage. He looked, for all the world, like a man in complete control of the room. He had no idea the room did not belong to him. "Thanks for having me," he said. "Oh, the pleasure's all mine," Frank replied, leaning back, eyes glinting with something between curiosity and mischief. "So, you've made the big move to America, stepped back from the family business." Frank raised an eyebrow, and in that single small motion, the temperature of the room shifted, though almost nobody in the audience registered it yet. "Your truth," Frank repeated slowly, like he was turning the phrase over, checking it for cracks. "Interesting way to put it. I always figured there was just the truth. Not yours, not mine. But hey, maybe that's an old-fashioned way of looking at things." A ripple of laughter moved through the crowd. Small. Testing. The Duke's smile held, but something behind his eyes tightened, just barely, the way a rope tightens under a weight it hasn't yet decided it can bear. "Well," he said carefully, "everyone has their own perspective." Sure, Frank agreed, nodding along, almost gently, which somehow made what came next land harder. "But let's talk about this freedom thing. You've done, what, a dozen interviews now about how much you value your privacy?" He let the pause stretch just long enough to become uncomfortable. "Doesn't that seem a little contradictory?" The laughter grew louder this time, less testing, more certain of itself. And somewhere in that laughter, the story the Duke had walked in planning to tell began, very quietly, to come apart at the seams. There is a particular moment, familiar to anyone who has ever watched a conversation curdle in real time, when the temperature in a room changes before anyone says anything to explain why. It's in the shift of a body in a chair, the half-second delay before a response. The audience, almost as one organism, leaning fractionally forward, sensing blood and water long before anyone draws it. That moment arrived now. The Duke shifted in his seat, the practiced ease from moments earlier already fraying at the edges. "I think there's a difference," he said, his voice finding an edge it hadn't had 30 seconds prior, "between controlling your own narrative and having it controlled for you. By the tabloids. By people who've spent my entire life deciding who I am before I get the chance to." "Controlling the narrative," Frank echoed, and there was something almost delighted in the way he said it, like a man who'd just been handed exactly the opening he wanted. "That's an interesting way to describe writing a memoir, doing a docuseries, and sitting on every couch in America that'll have you. That's not avoiding the narrative, my friend. That's a full-time job running it. You don't understand what it's like." The Duke shot back, and for the first time, real heat entered his voice. "Growing up in that system, every moment of your life picked apart. No voice of your own." "You're right," Frank said, spreading his hands, almost too calm. "I don't understand that. I grew up in New Jersey. My dad sold insurance. We didn't have palaces, we didn't have security details, we didn't have anybody bowing when we walked into a room." He leaned forward now, and the smirk was gone. "You had a platform bigger than almost anyone alive. You could have used it quietly, done the work, let it speak for itself. Instead, you're on my show telling me how hard it was to be royalty." The audience erupted, some clapping outright, others gasping, a ripple of "oh no, he didn't" moving through the room like static electricity. The Duke's face reddened, the composure he'd walked in with visibly cracking at the corners. "That's incredibly reductive," he said, sharp now, no longer performing warmth. "Is it?" Frank pressed, and he wasn't backing off, wasn't softening, wasn't doing any of the things every other host in America would have done to keep the peace. "Because from where I'm sitting, you've spent the last few years doing exactly what you say you hate. Courting the cameras, seeking the spotlight. And somewhere along the way, you gotta ask yourself, are you actually running from attention, or are you just trying to be the one holding the wheel?" What followed was not an interview anymore. It hadn't been for several minutes now, though neither man on that stage would have said exactly when it stopped being one. It had become something rawer. Two men, each convinced of his own version of honesty, refusing to yield an inch of ground, while an audience that had shown up expecting light entertainment found themselves witnesses to something closer to a confession neither party intended to give. The Duke's voice rose. "People like you mock anyone who talks about mental health, about trauma, about what it actually costs to live a life scrutinized down to the atom." "Whoa, whoa," Frank said, holding up both hands, and for a moment there was real irritation there, real refusal to be mischaracterized. Don't put words in my mouth. I've talked about mental health on this stage more times than I can count. I think therapy's great. I think people should get help when they need it. What I don't buy is the idea that being born into extraordinary privilege and then narrating your discomfort with it for profit makes you some kind of hero. I never said I was a hero. No, Frank said, and something in his tone had gone almost weary now, almost personal. But you sure carry yourself like one. Like you're the first person on Earth to have a complicated family. Newsflash, everybody's got that. The difference is most people don't get a 7-figure book deal to talk about it. The Duke half rose from his chair, an instinctive, aborted motion, gone as quickly as it appeared. Before sitting back down, visibly fighting to hold himself together. You have no idea what I've been through, he said, quiet now, dangerous in its quietness. You're right, Frank said. I don't know what it's like to inherit millions, live in a castle, get the best education money can buy handed to me before I could walk, travel anywhere, meet anyone, and still, somehow, find a way to be miserable about it. He shook his head slowly. Must be exhausting. This interview is ridiculous, the Duke said. Now we're getting somewhere, Frank said, and there was something almost gleeful in it. The look of a man who'd been waiting the entire segment for exactly this crack to appear. This is what happens when someone finally asks you a real question instead of the soft serve you're used to. And you don't like it. I don't like being disrespected. Disrespected? Frank laughed, short and sharp. I'm treating you exactly like I'd treat anyone else who sat in that chair. That's called equality. Thought that's what you loved about this country. Freedom doesn't mean being insulted, the Duke snapped. Actually, Frank said, leaning back now, almost lazy in his certainty, it kind of does. That's the whole point of the First Amendment. I get to say what I think, even if it stings. Especially if it stings. That's not cruelty. That's the deal. The audience had gone fully silent now, no longer laughing, no longer sure whether to. They were witnesses now, not spectators, and the shift in the room was almost physical. The sense of something real happening in a place built entirely for something rehearsed. There's a specific kind of silence that falls over a room when someone says something they cannot take back. Not the silence of confusion, and not the silence of shock exactly. Something quieter, heavier, the sound of an audience realizing they're watching a man's composure fail in real time and not knowing whether it's their place to feel anything about it at all. That silence arrived when the Duke, jaw tight, eyes glassy in a way the studio lights made impossible to hide, said the thing that changed the entire shape of the room. My mother died because of people like this, he said, his voice cracking on the word died. The years of careful media training falling away entirely, replaced by something rawer, something that had clearly never fully healed and maybe never would. You have no right to sit there and minimize that. The room went completely still. Frank paused. Actually paused, for the first time all night. The smirk gone entirely from his face, replaced by something that looked, for one unguarded second, like genuine sorrow. You're right, he said, and his voice had dropped, lost its edge entirely. That was a tragedy, a real one, and I am sorry you went through that. Genuinely. He let the words sit a moment, let the audience feel the sincerity land before he continued, gentler now, but no less unflinching. But, and I say this with respect, you can't use that as a shield forever. You can't reach for it every time someone disagrees with you. That's not fair to the moment. And it's not fair to her memory either. It was, in its way, the cruelest thing said all night, not because it was unkind, but because it was, at least in the world of this fictionalized exchange, precisely accurate, and accuracy has a way of cutting deeper than insult ever could. The Duke stood, not dramatically, almost mechanically, like his body had made the decision before his mind caught up. I don't have to sit here and listen to this. Actually, Frank said, still seated, still infuriatingly calm, you kind of do. You agreed to come on this show. We're in the middle of a conversation. Walking off because you don't like the questions, that's not dignity. That's just quitting. Childish. The Duke's voice rose now, filling the studio, echoing off the rigging above. You've done nothing but insult me since I sat down. I challenged you. Frank corrected, unmoving. There's a difference. And the fact that you can't tell them apart. That's kind of the whole problem, isn't it? You think disagreement is an attack. You think criticism is cruelty. That's not how the world works for the rest of us. In my world, the Duke said, people have manners. People have decency. In your world, Frank said, standing now himself, matching the energy in the room. People tell you what you want to hear. They bow. They scrape. They say yes, sir, whatever you say, sir. And you call that respect. It's not respect. It's fear, or obligation, or tradition dressed up as reverence. This, he gestured at the space between them. This is what it actually feels like when nobody's performing for you, and you don't know what to do with it. The audience didn't move. Didn't breathe, almost. Somewhere in the control room, a director who had covered 11 years of live television felt his stomach drop, understanding in real time that whatever was happening on that stage was no longer something the show could shape, only something it would have to survive. The Duke reached up, pulled the microphone from his lapel, the wire catching briefly before coming free. I'm done, he said, flat, final. Of course you are, Frank said quietly, and for once there was no triumph in it. Only something closer to disappointment. Can't take the heat. Leave the kitchen. And with that, he turned and walked toward the wings, the studio lights following him the entire way, the audience murmuring now, unsure if what they'd just watched was real, was planned, was something in between, unsure, most of all, what they were supposed to feel. Silence has weight. Anyone who has stood in a room right after something irreversible happens knows this. The way the air seems to thicken, the way nobody quite meets anyone else's eyes, the way even breathing feels like it might be too loud. That was the studio in the 60 seconds after the Duke disappeared into the wings. Frank stood alone on the stage, the second chair empty beside him, and for a long moment, he simply looked at the space where his guest had been. Then he turned back to the camera, and something in his posture had changed, not defeated, not proud either, just tired, in the specific way people get tired after something that mattered more than they expected it to. Well, he said, that went well. Scattered, uncertain laughter rippled through the crowd, the sound of people who wanted permission to laugh and weren't entirely sure they'd been given it. Look, Frank continued, and his voice had lost its edge now, gone almost reflective. We all carry things. We all have pain, complicated families, moments we wish had gone differently. That's not unique to anybody in this room, or anybody watching at home. He paused. But most of us don't get to make our pain the centerpiece of our whole identity. Most of us have to get up in the morning, go to work, take care of the people who depend on us, and carry it quietly. That's not because our pain matters less. It's because that's what growing up actually looks like. The applause, when it came, was uncertain, mixed, some clapping in agreement, some sitting in stunned quiet, a few audience members already reaching for their phones, already knowing this clip would be everywhere within the hour. They were right. Within minutes, backstage, producers were fielding calls. Within an hour, clips were circulating, stripped of context, reassembled into 1,000 different narratives. Some sympathetic to the Duke, some to the host, most simply hungry for the spectacle of it. The way modern media always is when something real slips through the cracks of something scripted. Backstage, in the chaos behind the curtain, the Duke's security detail formed a quiet perimeter as he made his way to a waiting car, his face unreadable, his publicist already on the phone, already trying to shape whatever story would emerge from the wreckage of the last 10 minutes. Nobody, in that moment, fully understood what they had just witnessed. Not the audience, not the crew, maybe not even the two men at the center of it. But everyone understood this much. Something honest, however messy, however uncomfortable, had happened on a stage built for something else entirely. And honesty, once it enters a room, has a way of refusing to leave quietly. There's a version of this story where everyone wins. Where the Duke gets to tell his truth and the host gets to ask his questions, and both walk away having understood something new about the other. That's not the story that unfolded here, not in this imagined telling, and rarely in life either, where real conversations about privilege and pain and privacy tend to be messier, more uncomfortable, less resolved than we'd like them to be. Because somewhere in that exchange is a question worth sitting with, whoever we are, whatever we've inherited or earned or survived. How much of our pain do we perform, and how much do we simply carry? Where is the line between telling our truth and demanding the world reorganize itself around it? There are no easy answers here. Only the uncomfortable recognition that both men in this story believed, entirely, that they were the one being honest. And that maybe honesty was never really the thing standing between them at all. Maybe it was just two people in very different kinds of pain, neither willing to be the first to put it down.